Good morning. Today is Wednesday, September 10th. This is Wake Up with KERA News, and I'm Andrew Garcia. It's officially the middle of the week, and we can expect sunny weather with highs in the low 90s. Coming up, we'll hear why a typically quiet government agency has come under fire recently. That's after today's news. Let's dive on in. A co-defendant in a Tarrant County hate crime trial says her vandalism was not anti-Semitic. KERA's Miranda Suarez reports 3 people face hate crime accusations for spray painting F Israel on a church in Euless.
Ronak Alam's trial started Monday, and he faces up to 10 years in prison. His co-defendant, Julia Venzer, testified against him Tuesday as part of a deal she made with prosecutors. But on the stand, she insisted they vandalized the church only to protest Israel's war in Gaza. Fellow activist Stacey Monroe was watching the trial.
They're not anti-Semitic. They're anti-Israel. And that was a really great point that she made. Even though she is cooperating with the state, she's being truthful.
A professor of modern Judaism who also testified said the vandalism was violent and threatening. For KERA News, I'm Miranda Suarez in Fort Worth.
Governor Greg Abbott is expected to issue an executive order to regulate THC products. Texas Public Radio's David Martin Davies has more.
The legislature's second special session ended without passing a bill to regulate or ban THC sales in Texas. The Texas Tribune is reporting Abbott will likely use his executive powers to take action on THC. At a bill signing Friday, Abbott said, quote, "Stay tuned on that." The draft framework includes a 21 age limit to buy or enter businesses, ID checks, distance requirements from schools, labeling standards, mandatory testing of THC levels, and higher fees for businesses. A timeline for Abbott's executive order is unknown. I'm David Martin Davies in San Antonio.
When you think of controversy, the Texas Funeral Service Commission likely doesn't come to mind. But in just 2 months, the usually quiet Funeral Regulation Agency has fired its executive director and 5 other employees. Much of the turmoil stems from accusations that the agency's head commissioner lobbied for bills that could benefit her own funeral business. But experts say the rules aren't so straightforward. KERA's Justin Martin spoke with law and justice reporter Tolawani Osibamwo about why that is.
So Tolawani, could you start by explaining what exactly the Funeral Commission does? I feel like it's not super well known.
Of course. So the Funeral Commission licenses funeral homes, embalmers, crematories, and other death care professionals, and they set generally funeral industry standards across the state. And they also have a board, which is often referred to as the commission. So Kristen Tips is the head of that board. She's been there since about 2017, and Governor Greg Abbott appointed her chair last year.
So you mentioned Kristen Tips, who's the subject of these allegations about improper lobbying in the legislature. Talk to me about what exactly she did and why these fired employees are saying it's illegal?
Mm-hmm. Sure. So Tips testified throughout this year's legislative session, and she testified on 3 or 4 measures that are at issue here, but to be clear, none of these bills passed. So she testified for measures that would have made it so that if you sue a funeral provider, the damages that you can get for mental anguish that the incident allegedly caused would be capped at either $250,000 or 3 times what you paid for the funeral service, whichever is lower. And Mission Park, which is Kristen Tips' funeral business, has been sued for these kinds of things before. In one case, there was a woman whose body was lost after her funeral service when it was about to be transferred for cremation. And then in the other, a mother's ashes and urn had been destroyed at a burial site that Mission Park owns. And so those 2 jury verdicts together were about $9 million that Mission Park was ordered to pay. And now the former executive director who was fired, Scott Bingaman, claims that Tips was advocating for limits on damages to protect her own business from liability. He also said that she had staff do research on these bills when they weren't necessarily relevant to the commission.
And I know you talked to some experts on these sorts of issues. What was their read on whether TIPS is acting unlawfully or unethically?
So here's what I learned. The definition of lobbying in Texas is actually very narrow. So you really have to be paid and actively trying to lobby in order to be considered a lobbyist in Texas. But something like the Funeral Commission, a state agency, isn't allowed to use state resources to try to advocate for or against bills in the legislature. And that can be a very broad category of behavior. So what TIPS is doing could be illegal, perhaps if she's doing this during work hours, but that's often very hard to prove. And here's Andrew Cates, a political attorney and lobbyist, sharing why.
If you show up and you just testify on a bill, that's not trying to influence the passage or defeat. That's just providing information about what you think about it or what the agency thinks about it or whatever. Of course, it's also subjective. Like, what are you actually saying in that hearing versus what did you register as?
So this area of law and politics is just generally quite murky because you have these people who were appointed by the governor to serve as subject matter experts in their industry. So it's important for them to advocate on or for or against bills that could impact the industry as a whole. But then it gets dicey when this legislation could directly or indirectly affect their own business, which in some cases is inevitable.
The Rangers play the Milwaukee Brewers again this evening. They won last night's game 5-4. And head to Art Center Plano to check out the vibrant paintings in the Finding Joy exhibition. For more information and some other fun things to do, visit our Go See DFW calendar at kera.org/calendar. Thanks for listening to Wake Up with KERA News. I'm your host, Andrew Garcia. The show is produced by Shardae White with editing support from Bekah Morr. For more news in your inbox, visit kera.org/wakeup. That's where you can subscribe to the Wake Up with KERA News newsletter. You'll get a more in-depth look into the news with plenty of good morning vibes. Connect with us on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. We're at KERATX. Have a great day.